Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andre and I'm your bookworm, and today we are back into fantasy reviews and we are reviewing the buddy read that I've been doing, which is for A Song of Ice and Fire by George R. R. Martin, and today we are reviewing A Storm of Swords. For the ones that don't know, A Storm of Swords is the third book of A Song of Ice and Fire, a very famous epic fantasy series that you probably know as well by the TV show adaptation that came from it, which is called A Game of Thrones, which is the name of the first book. I have read and reviewed the first two books here on the channel. You can check them out through the thumbnails or the cards above. Just click on it, follow through, give us some views, some likes, just so to get this channel going. And yeah, let's get on for these two books, which is actually the edition I have are just, it's one book just split into two, which is funny because the Portuguese edition that I read initially also did the same thing, but I actually read them in a row. So this book I read as part of the buddy read I'm reading, but focusing on this book was initially published in 2000, which means it was 25 years ago, which is crazy to think of. I don't imagine this book being published when I was like 7 years old, so it's really weird to think that 25 years have passed. But I mean, at the time, it wasn't as known as it would turn out to be, especially with the fame of the TV show that came after. But still, it was nominated for a lot of awards and it won quite a few. So even then, people saw the potential and the greatness of this book and thought it was deserving of it. On Goodreads, this book has gathered over 823,000 ratings, almost a million ratings, and the average score it has is a 4.55 out of 5, which is still a huge score considering all the amount of reviews it has, but also considering it's the third book of a series. Usually third books tend to have a higher rating because only the true fans stick around to read it and they enjoy it if the book is good. But considering that so many people that aren't really just fans, they just read it because of the TV show or just because everyone was talking about it, kept reading, and the score is still this high is really impressive. But like another thing we need to talk about is, like I said, this is a reread for me. It's a buddy read. I have read this book in the Portuguese edition back when I was still in Portugal. So this perspective, this review will be of a reread. Take that into account when I talk about how some things are expected or how some things I could see them coming differently, all of those details. Now, before we jump into the actual review, you know the drill, we have two things to talk about. One of them is the synopsis. If you're new, I'm just going to narrate the synopsis so that we can be all on the same page. If you don't want to hear anything about it because you might know what happens because this book was really famous, or if you don't want to hear because spoilers, after all, this is the third book, there will be spoilers about it. So jump into the next timestamp, you'll jump right into the actual review of the book. Otherwise, stick around and you'll be hearing me. And I hope I've given enough time for you to skip if you were doing something else. So let's go. Of the 5 contenders for power, one is dead, another in disfavor, and still the wars rage as alliances are made and broken. Joffrey sits on the Iron Throne, the uneasy ruler of the 7 kingdoms. His most bitter rival, Lord Stannis, stands defeated and disgraced, victim of the sorceress who holds him in her thrall. Young Robb still rules the north from the fortress of Riverrun. Meanwhile, making her way across a blood-drenched continent is the exiled queen, Daenerys, mistress of the only 3 dragons still left in the world. And as opposing forces maneuver for the final showdown, an army of barbaric wildlings arrives from the outermost limits of civilization, accompanied by a horde of mythical others, a supernatural army of the living dead whose animated corpses are unstoppable. As the future of the land hangs in the balance, no one will rest until the 7 kingdoms have exploded in a veritable storm of swords. Alrighty, and with that out of the way, we just have to talk about the scores I gave to the previous 2 books, just so we have an idea where we stand or where I stand in terms of this series. And as you can see, we have a 5 for the first book and a 4.6 for the second book. So those are 2 very good scores. The second one is a bit lower. It suffered a tiny bit on world building and on characters. You can check the review to know what I said exactly about it, but still, I think it's an amazing book nonetheless. It is a lesson for many rising authors on how a great epic fantasy book should be written, or at least If you don't consider this epic fantasy, maybe grim or maybe anti-fantasy, like some say, it's still a great example that you should read and just analyze how George R. R. Martin does things. Or if you just enjoy fantasy for the sake of fantasy, it's a great book to read if you haven't done so. But anyways, if you've read the third book, you know that this one is full of surprises, and the score that'll come up shouldn't really surprise you. But let's get on with it, starting with plot. The third book of this series is no different from the other two in the sense that we follow a whole bunch of different POVs, and most of them are accompanied by since the first book, we have been accompanying them from the first book till now. Some of them showed up on the second book, and of course there are some new POVs here and there for this one. It is a pattern repeated from the second book, and back then when I did the review for that book, I did mention that this comes with pros and cons. The pros is that by adding new POVs, we get to explore different parts of the world, and we get to have a bigger sense of what is happening everywhere around, because this is a big world, different continents, so it's good that we have different perspectives all around the world. However, some readers do not like to be introduced to new characters every single book because they have to habituate, connect with them again, and so that might come as a con. Of course, this is very subjective. It depends person to person. So for you, you might not consider that a con. For others, this might be a deal breaker. I'm just letting you know that this exists, and for me, it did not matter as much in the second book because it's starting to be natural, this new addition, as some characters are also taken off and you don't hear more about them. But also another thing to consider is how good the plot is, because that definitely plays a role in it. Because, for example, in this book, the plot is absolutely epic and mind-blowing. And so I don't think learning about new characters is as it has such a big cost that drives you away, because the plot will keep you grounded and it will keep you just enthralled in it, and you will be wanting to read more no matter what perspective it is. And by this, of course, I'm talking about the plot twists. I won't spoil anything because even though some people might not have read it, so I won't spoil anything. But for the ones that know, the Red Wedding, the Purple Wedding, all of those events are just epic. And I would say they're probably some of the biggest twists written in fantasy. And a benefit of doing a reread is noticing so many little details that I did not notice in the first pass. And some of them are vastly important for the future, like some culprits of some things that happen in those weddings, but also noticing how much foreshadowing it existed for these big events that happen in this book, that I was noticing them in the previous books, and I don't remember noticing at all those small details on my first read. So, of course, this category deserves a 5 out of 5. It's impossible to give any less. Moving on to the character category, besides what I mentioned before in the plot regarding the old versus new POVs, I think in general, George R. R. Martin does an amazing job in character development. I think these are some of the characters that feel the most real in fantasy, overall. With every single character, you can see their progression. You can see how they change ever so slightly through time. And if you compare the characters that have been there since the first book, or even from the second book till to the end of this third book, you can see that they are changed. They are different people. They have progressed for the better or for the worse, but they have changed and there has been development. I think none of the character work is stagnant, which is really important if you want your readers to keep connecting with the characters and not think that they have plot armor or that they're just useless or not interesting whatsoever. Maybe one of the ones I find the slowest is Bran, but still, I think if I compare it with the first book, Bran is completely different. There has been progression, maybe not as much as, for example, Sansa or Robb or any of the other characters like Daenerys or Jaime or Cersei whatsoever, but there has been a bit of progress. And the other thing I like to mention in this category is how the plot catalyzes the characters as well and catalyzes their development, and how the plot can mark these characters for the remaining of the book or for the remaining of the series. Because I think that the shocking moments that happen, which are perfectly coherent with the story and with the world, they aren't just shocking, they become traumatic for these characters. They affect how they will develop and affects how they think and how will they act in the future. And I think that makes them more real. It makes them feel like they are just as real as us. So for this category, it's going to be a 5 out of 5 too. What about world building? I think this category has some goods, but there's also a point here and there that I think is less good. I still think George R. R. Martin does a great work at showing us the world, at exposing us to this world and the rich history that the world has. Because no matter where the characters go, what they experience, what they smell, see, feel, affects what they are thinking in the moment, and that is the way George Martin sees to give us information to the world. Maybe they've experienced something in that particular place that reminds them of the past, or maybe they remember something someone has told them about that specific place. And with all these situations, we keep getting information of how the world was, or who lived there, or how things were affected in the past to make the events of today. However, I did feel like world building was put a bit in the back burner in this book. But I understand we cannot put the world building at the forefront all the time. In fact, this book is not about world building. It's more about the characters and how they deal in a situation like this. However, I wish there was a bit more of explanation on the magic of this world, or just a bit more of exploration slash history that exists, but not as in the same way. I think the first book did a very good job, but maybe because everywhere was new. So it felt like everything we were exploring was new as well. So I have to take that into account. And I mean, it's not like there's nothing. There is exploration. For example, this is the book where you get introduced to people from Dorne. So that is a new culture per se. And I think it gets explored more in future books, but we do get a tiny bit of it. So I think for this category, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. But again, it's like a 4 plus. It's a high 4 for me. And after world building, we have writing style. And of course, an author like George R. R. Martin doesn't get as famous as he does without writing well. And I mean, that comes with a lot of experience because he has written a lot of novels and short stories. And so his writing has leveled up to excellence. The prose, I think, is ideal for this type of book. It is descriptive, but I don't think it's overly descriptive. It's not like we are getting every single detail in a room or a dress or whatsoever. We do get a lot of detail in terms of history, but I think it doesn't feel boring or it doesn't feel overly descriptive pretty much. So I think it strikes a perfect balance for it. And on top of that, like I mentioned, the character work is absolutely insane because I think it complements with everything else. Every character feels different from each other. And the fact that the way he writes everything around affects the way they think, what they do, I think shows how Martin's writing is top notch. And of course, the pacing of this book is crazy in a good way. I think you have huge peaks when you least expect them, but it's not like they aren't coherent with the story. They come close, they creep on you without you noticing. And when you realize, you're like, boom, there's a huge peak, there's a plot twist, your mind is being blown, and you're like, whoa, where did this come from? But again, in a reread, you can see it coming from a great distance. And then after that, you have the valleys where you basically just have to breathe in and take all the aftermath and think, oh my God, what is gonna happen next? And then again, when you least notice, boom, another peak. And it goes on and on. So I think George Martin did a great job at the pacing for this book. It is a full-on journey that I think you should enjoy, whether it's a first read or a reread. So for this category, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5. And the last category is enjoyment, which, like I say most of the time, this is the category that is the most subjective, and it can change completely depending on the person. I remember enjoying reading this book a lot on my first read, and remember that I read the Portuguese version, which is also split in two, but I read the two books in different times. I read the first half, and then I don't know how long after, maybe months after, I read the second half. So even then, I thought the two were just amazing. And on a reread, I think I enjoy it just as much, if not more. First of all, because I read them in a row, so it was like I was reading one thing coherent without any pauses, and I knew everything that was coming. And I think that created a sense of anticipation where I wanted to reach that part where I knew things were going to happen, but also noticing all the other details about things that were about to happen, or how I didn't notice things that will impact the future books. It really brings out the enjoyment of reading a book like this. And of course, reading about these characters is enjoyable per se because they are all so vivid, so real, that you feel like you're basically watching a show, but it's while reading a book, and that is very enjoyable. And I think that's independent of being a reread or a first read. So altogether, I think this is a great reading experience, and it deserves a 5 out of 5 as well. And so we reach the end of our review. Just as a refresher, we have 5 for plot, 5 for characters, 4 for world building, 5 for writing style, and 5 for enjoyment, which gives us a final score of 4.8 out of 5. It's very, very close to getting another 5. Even the 4 that it got, it's a 4 plus, so it's practically a 5. But nonetheless, it is still an amazing score. And I mean, the whole series so far has had an amazing score, because 4.6 is very high considering. And considering these are 3 books, we are 3 books into the series, and the scores are still all above 4.5. But then again, I think we all know that the worst is yet to come, but let's not think about that just yet. For now, I'll say that these 3 books are amazing, and I 100% recommend reading them if you haven't already, because, I mean, who hasn't? Maybe for the ones that are too new to have gone through the craze of Game of Thrones, I do recommend you read it. Or if you're living under a rock and you haven't heard about this series, I recommend you read it. And if you've read it already, but you're not sure if you should do a reread, I totally recommend a reread, because it has been very fun to reread this series. But let me know, what do you think of this book? Which of the weddings is your favorite, or which one did shock you the most? For me, I mean, the Red Wedding is definitely, I think, the most shocking, but I want to know your opinion. Comment down below. And if you're new, don't forget, subscribe, like the content, and I shall be seeing you on Thursdays and Sundays, okay? See you soon.